What's going on, guys? Kevin here from thesportsgeek.com, and in this video, Ian's going to go over his DraftKings CFL Week 5 picks. If you guys are enjoying his CFL pick videos, make sure you click the thumbs up button on YouTube, and he'll continue to keep doing these picks each week for us. Enjoy the video, guys.
This is Ian Cameron, CFL DraftKings contributor for thesportsgeek.com, and we're going to be taking a look at Week 5 CFL DraftKings. Lots of interesting options this week. Now, the thing that I want to point out before we get into the specifics is, of course, I'm a sports handicapper by trade, and I bet CFL football, one of the sports I bet on every single year and do very well with. This is one of those weeks where, from a betting perspective, I find there's not great value in a lot of the games this week. It's probably the lightest, or weakest, I should say, betting card so far this season in the CFL. And I find my opinions with betting sometimes correlate with fantasy lineups. You know, if I find a week of football, the card is not great from a betting perspective, may not be quite as great either from a fantasy lineup perspective. That being said, I still think there are some decent options out there. We're going to talk about many of them. Let's get to it and start at the quarterback position this week here in the CFL for Week 5. Trevor Harris, the top quarterback option once again. What else is new there? 11.2K for Trevor Harris this week. To me, he's the most expensive quarterback on the board. Everyone's going to have him. He had another brilliant game last week against the Toronto Argonauts, a 30-20 win. 26.5 DK points in that game. He's averaging nearly 29 DK points per game, 9 touchdowns, 1 interception, almost 1,500 passing yards already this season for Trevor Harris. I can't talk anyone out of not taking him. I mean, he's deserving of the number one mantle from a price perspective. If you want to be a contrarian, maybe you stay away, but the production seems to be there week in and week out. It's hard to deny that for Trevor Harris. Mike Riley at 11.1K this week, the second quarterback for Edmonton. I think that's a guy I'm staying away from. Orlando Steinauer and that Hamilton defense actually has the number one defense so far in the CFL in terms of yards per game allowed. So Hamilton's defense, the strength of that team, may not be the easiest matchup for Mike Riley and that Edmonton offense this week. So I'm not big on Riley. Harris I wouldn't argue with. I think the more value quarterbacks this week, Mitchell's an option for Calgary, $9,800. Bo Levi Mitchell, I think, could be able to put up some decent numbers against that Winnipeg defense, because we saw last week, second half of the game, that offense kept stalling for the Blue Bombers. The defense wore down. And so Bo Levi Mitchell might be able to make some hay with that. I think from a value quarterback situation this week, maybe Jeremiah Masoli for Hamilton, $8,400. I know he's underwhelmed a lot this season, but he's been better on the road, oddly enough. He didn't play well at home against BC and Winnipeg, Hamilton's 2 losses, but on the road, played very well against the Argos in Week 1, played very well in the second half, specifically last week against Montreal. They finally got things going. $8,400. I'm still a little worried about that Edmonton defense. Yeah, they played better last week against Winnipeg, but boy, that Winnipeg offense, Drew Willie, errant throws left and right. Winnipeg offensive line couldn't protect for Drew Willie. Edmonton's defensive front just completely tore up the line of scrimmage time in and time out last week. So from that standpoint, I'm not sure, Edmonton's defense playing a bad offense last week, not sure they're back on track just because they had a much better game after getting shredded by Ottawa and Saskatchewan in Week 1. So Masoli might be worth a look at $8,400 this week. Mitchell Gale's the wild card, because for Saskatchewan, he's likely going to be the starting quarterback. $7,400. If you missed it, Darian Durant injured again last week, the poor son of a bitch. I mean, I really feel bad for the guy. He gets injured, it seems, every single year now. It's really too bad. He's not likely to play in this game. The latest was from head coach Chris Jones of the Rough Riders saying that Darian Durant is unlikely to play. So that means Mitchell Gale steps in as the quarterback. He did get playing time second half last week against BC after Durant got injured, but boy, he really struggled. Not to be unexpected for sure. Gale, first start of the year, all unexpected with Durant going out. He's going to obviously benefit from preparation time, practice to get ready for this game, but he's a wild card, $7,400. The good news is, if you want to take a flyer with Mitchell Gale, Ottawa's likely to be ahead in this game against Saskatchewan. He's going to be throwing the football probably quite a bit in the second half if Saskatchewan's trailing in this game. So, he's got a chance to build up some yardage that way, put some fantasy points on the board for you. It might be worth a consideration with Mitchell Gale at $7,400. Certainly the price is great. And again, if Saskatchewan's trailing, they're going to have to put the ball in the air. And you would think with the way Trevor Harris has been lighting up opposing defenses, and Saskatchewan's defense still dealing with injuries, still a work in progress, and Chris Jones' first year as head coach, could be some more growing pains for that Rough Rider defense that could allow Ottawa to get ahead early, force Mitchell Gale to put the ball in the air to try to rally Saskatchewan from behind. So for that reason, Gale might be worth a flyer this week at quarterback. Moving on to running backs, John White for the Edmonton Eskimos. We've been looking at him in previous weeks here from a running back perspective. An interesting choice this week, but Hamilton just allowing 63.5 rushing yards per game. So staying away from John White, especially now that he's the highest priced running back. I think Jerome Messham's a good choice for Calgary. $7,300. That Winnipeg defense, we saw it actually when Calgary played Winnipeg in Calgary earlier this season. Jerome Messam ran over that Winnipeg defense, especially in the second half when they were really starting to get tired. So I think this could be a game where we see Jerome Messam of the Calgary Stampeders have a very solid performance here, taking on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. 16.7 DK points for Messam in that first matchup against Winnipeg, his highest DraftKings output so far this season. So for that reason, I think Messam matches up well against this Winnipeg team. Could have a big performance on the ground. I think he's worth a look. Messam at $7,300 here this week. Nick Grigsby, I think, has some solid value for Ottawa at running back, $5,900 this week. They're using the guy, and you look at what he's done now, Nick Grigsby, since signing with the team. He's gotten 2 starts at running back due to all the injuries. Of course, William Powell out, Trayvon Van out at running back for the Red Blacks, and Grigsby's picked up the slack. 14 DK points per game. In over 14 DK points per game in each of his first 2 starts at running back against Calgary and Toronto. So I think value-wise, it's there. Again, Saskatchewan's defense still a major work in progress, and Ottawa likes throwing those quick short passes to the running back out of the backfield. So again, that's another way that Nick Grigsby might be able to accumulate some points here in this game. So I think at $5,900, the price there on Nick Grigsby, not too bad. That's pretty much all I really stuck out to me in terms of running backs. Moving on to wide receiver this week, Chris Williams, again, topping the list, 11.2K, if you want to include Chris Williams of the Ottawa Red Blacks in your lineup. Finally last week, you weren't getting the bang for your buck with Chris Williams against Toronto. 13.5 DK points for Chris Williams last week, after he had 44 against Calgary, 37 against Montreal, 41 against Edmonton. Unfortunately for the Argos, who Ottawa played last week, Greg Ellingson ended up burning them instead. They put all their attention on shutting down Williams, and it was Greg Ellingson that ended up going off for the Red Blacks in that win against the Argos. So, tricky. I'm going to stay away from Williams, but now what do you do if you're a defense, if you're Saskatchewan? Do you all of a sudden put more attention on Ellingson after what he did last week? That's a big chess match and a big decision that Chris Jones has to make heading into this one. Bowman and Walker next up, the dynamic receiving duo for Edmonton. I think they're pretty high priced, and again, I respect what Hamilton's defense has done, especially on the road. So I don't know if there's a great slew of value in Edmonton offensive players this week. We talked about Riley. I'm staying away from him, the quarterback. Not sure I want to get involved with Bowman or Walker either. I think Duron Carter, 9,000. That's not bad. He's the 4th receiver on the receivers list in terms of pricing. Duron Carter is going to get, I think, a lot of looks this week from Rakeem Cato, assuming he is once again the quarterback. If Kevin Glenn can't go, that game's not till Monday, so very tricky right now to pinpoint, injury statuses for a lot of these players on Montreal right now. But we know they're still going to be without S.J. Green. We know they're still going to be without Kenny Stafford in that receiving core, and that means Duron Carter becomes absolutely the focal point of this passing game for whoever's at quarterback for Montreal. So Carter's worth a look. I think in terms of Montreal too, Carter, and then if you think if it's too high priced for you and you can't fit him in your lineup, maybe you look at B.J. Cunningham, who again is a guy that Cato targeted a little bit last week against Hamilton, or Nick Lewis, the veteran. And of course, Nick Lewis is the guy that spouted his mouth off after that horrible loss for Montreal last week. Just got destroyed by Hamilton. He was not happy. He let his teammates know it, that he was not happy with their performance. So maybe that means Nick Lewis comes out here with fire, breathing fire, and has a big game at receiver. So from Montreal, if you're going to look at receivers for them, Carter's the obvious choice, but Cunningham and Lewis might be decent values as well there. How about Saskatchewan? Naaman Roosevelt. I think, he's worth a look, $7,900. His production continues to be solid. Nothing wrong with what Roosevelt's done. 22 DK points against Toronto, 24 DK points last week against BC for Roosevelt. I think he's going to be a target for Mitchell Gale at quarterback. And another value receiver for Saskatchewan, it might be Ricky Collins. You go all the way down and find Ricky Collins at 4,900. I think Ricky Collins is getting more targets by the week. He had that huge game against Edmonton, 26 DK points. Was not very much involved last week. 3 receptions, 53 yards, 8 DK points against BC last week. But again, with Saskatchewan likely to be trailing in this game, Ricky Collins might be someone Mitchell Gale looks at to make big plays in the passing game, because you got to expect Saskatchewan going to be in tough to stop this tremendous Red Blacks offense, going to be behind. Maybe that's where Ricky Collins can make some hay catching the football. So he's another value option. Same as Taekwon Underwood. I'm still sticking to my guns here. $4,100. The guy, he's being targeted really by Jeremiah Masoli here. Problem is, we're still waiting for him to have that big breakout game, but he's showing some signs at least. Against Winnipeg, 10 DK points, 10.6, 10.8 last week against Montreal, 5 receptions against Winnipeg, 4 against Montreal. His receiving yard output climbing from 46 to 56 to 68. I think he's gradually integrating himself more and more into this offense. They do get Terrence Tolliver back as well this week, this Hamilton offense. And now that he's back in the lineup, he also may be worth a look. 6,500 for the Ticats. Again, jury's out for me still on this Edmonton defense. Much better against Winnipeg last week, but I'm convinced Winnipeg just not a very good offensive team. Prior to that, Edmonton's defense blasted by Ottawa and Saskatchewan. So, I still have question marks about how good Edmonton's defense is, especially in the secondary, which is where they can be picked apart. They're pretty good, actually, up front. They can get pressure on the quarterback. They can stop the run pretty well. But there's holes in that secondary, holes in that Edmonton pass defense that maybe, some of these Hamilton receivers might be able to exploit. All right, we're going to wrap it up with DST options. Hamilton, highest price DST option, $5,500. I like the way Hamilton's defense played last week. I told everyone I'm going to be on this Hamilton defense last week against Montreal, and they lived up to the billing. They were just fantastic, completely shut down Montreal. 24 DK points for that Hamilton defense. A kick return touchdown for Brandon Banks, who's always a threat to return one to the end zone. But they're playing Edmonton here. Okay, Edmonton Eskimos offense. Mike Riley really hasn't been shut down yet this season, so I'm going to stay away from Hamilton's defense this week. Calgary's defense, 5,200, worth a look. They played very well against Winnipeg in week 2. Again, a defense that should be able to have their way. I don't trust Winnipeg's offense and Drew Willie, who continues to not throw the ball accurately, continues to be under pressure routinely. Calgary's defense, 5,200. I think that's a solid option. Montreal's defense, you know what? The offense just didn't move the football enough last week. They were on the field too much. Going to pass there. When I look at it, to keep things brief here, Calgary's defense, probably my top option this week in terms of DST. That's, Red Blacks, potentially the Red Blacks defense, 4,600. I mean, it's way down there. I don't know what we're going to get from Mitchell Gale. I don't know if I trust this guy in his first official start as a CFL number 1 quarterback with Darian Duran injured. For that reason alone, Ottawa might be worth a look. But I think from a DST perspective this week, Calgary Stampeders, 5,200. Heads, no doubt about it, with Calgary, my top option this week. As I try to find the words to spit that one out. But yeah, Calgary would be my top option DST-wise this week. All right. That will do it for my look at CFL DraftKings Week 5. As always, appreciate the kind words and comments. Good luck to everyone with your CFL DraftKings lineups this week, and we'll be back next week here on thesportsgeek.com to look at Week 6 CFL DraftKings. Good luck, and enjoy the Canadian Football League action here in Week 5.